overall test weight of our grains. Copper can be an important timing for this period as well. Sulfur is very important to make sure that our nitrogen is in good relationship at this stage, and often can be associated with a good protein content in our grains. Making sure that sulfur is there. There's a number of micros that we can focus on as well. At times, we discussed this as well, but later in the season, cobalt can take a little bit more of a player because that can help with senescence, delay, helping them stay alive a little bit longer. So that's a long-winded way of trying to think through it. I will say, John Kempf goes through a number of these elements and a lot of these nutrients based upon critical points of influence. Just write that little phrase down, critical points of influence. There's a number of really good talks that go through that and talk about the dominant nutrients that we can think about that are needed in that time period. And generally speaking, as consultants, we try to basically form most of our fertility programs around these critical points of influence. And so if you look at a spray program that we might be suggesting based on what the grower has available or what we might be able to provide, like it is around these critical points of influence where we feel like we can make the best change in the most efficient way possible.
While we're still in Q&A, we finished up with that. A new term popped up for me. Brix, you mentioned Brix. Can somebody expand on that? Does that show up on one of these bar graphs, or how do you know?
No, sir, it doesn't. No, sir, it doesn't. You can get Brix meters. They're fairly cheap. And what you do is you take a leaf, you crush it, you try to extract the liquid as much as possible from it. And if you do it in the morning, it's easier. The leaves will get a little bit drier as through the day progresses. It's harder to do it, so if you do it in the morning, it's easier. Brix levels fluctuate throughout the day. So very similar to sap, take it at a certain time. It's total dissolved nutrients, total dissolved solids, excuse me. So it's not just sugars. We often say Brix is sugars. It's not just sugars. Sugars, carbohydrates are in there. A lot of other total dissolved solids are in there as well, other dissolved solids. So what is it? It's an indication of the density of nutrients in the sap or in the liquid that you've expressed from that leaf. And so as the number goes up, we have associated or correlated certain kinds of disease and pest resistance with that number. There are a number of people that will make claims that the higher you go up in Brix, the more resistance you can be to a number of pests, including your more complicated ones, including things like grasshoppers. This is a complicated topic. You know, can calcium, for example, help chewers, grasshoppers? Well, there's been some studies in which high levels of calcium in a leaf, actually act as a kind of sandpaper on the mandibles as they chew, so that they can't keep chewing. So there's a mechanical effect. So it's just a health indicator that says, like, how dense is this sap with nutrients? And we can correlate a kind of resilience against pests and disease with Brix, but it is a fluctuating number. It's going to change throughout the day, potentially through the year as well, and it's also going to potentially change based upon what kind of leaf you're pulling.
So does anybody, y'all have leavers?
I know somebody that does.
I think I have one for honey. Someone gave me.
Yeah. Stuff you look through?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's digital ones, and then there's the ones where you look through. So I have one that's a digital one that I would often do it with, like, our peaches, and you just express some of the pulp out of it. If I get a Brix reading on it, it's going to tell me what, like, the total dissolved solids are in there. You can get a garlic, one of those garlic presses, and shove leaf into it and just squeeze the heck out of it in the morning. You'll get some juice out of it, and then put that. So the digital ones have a little well that you put it on, and then it reads it. The ones that you look through are a real thin little open, there's a little plastic clasp. You open it, you just put a couple of drops of that, it closes it back on there, and then you look through it, and it'll show you generally what that Brix level is.
How about Brix? She looked through and got Brix.
That's something like Trump right now.
I guess my question is, okay, I know my nutrients are low, then what? Is it good to do that right before you do your sap analysis or? You know,
Right.
It tells me it's low, okay,
It tells you it's low, but it doesn't tell you what it's low in.
that's right. Or if it's high,
Right.
it's probably thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah, you know, if I see a level of 14 bricks, what'd you say you were pulling alarm on? In the leaf? Were you doing leaf?
It seems like it was 16.
16? That's up there. That's up there. So if I'm pulling that, I know that at that time, I'm at a certain level of density of health that says I'm pretty good. Could I be potentially deficient in a couple of micros or something? Yeah, potentially. But at least I'm showing it's a big mass number. SAT kind of breaks that number apart into multiple categories so you get a better sense on what is happening in the system.
Sort of like a blood pressure check, you know, sign on the opposite joint, they love
Yeah.
that, but it's an indicator.
It's an indicator.
So do I need to, am I okay, or do I
Right,
need to,
yeah.
really take other corrective action?
But it's going to be hard to be like, well, you need more X, Y, and Z,
Right.
or less of this, because
No, I mean, but it sounds like they're relatively inexpensive.
Totally.
It's not a big deal, it may be worthwhile investing in one, so you can try, especially because if you'll spend some dollars to get this sap analysis, we don't know how much it's gonna cost you.
It's gonna kind of correlate too to like the taste and the nutrient quality of what you're harvesting. Like, you know, the more nutrients you have in the plant and the fruit, the better it is for you too. And the better it's gonna taste.
Okay, but anyway, that clarifies that a lot. Earlier.
you bet. Good.
What products? You know, we're primarily forage based cattle. What products is any of this? From just listening, I could see cobalt, manganese, and maybe silica benefit in a pasture setting. Is there anything else that would, you know?
The pasture setting, are we talking about a hay system?
No, I'm strictly
When you still
rotationally
kinda
grazed.
focus on the photosynthesis portion of it though.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not really producing a grain crop,
Yeah.
but you're producing plant.
Right.
Mhm.
You know, depending on the percentage or the ratios of your grasses to your legumes or even some herb forage, I would
Mhm.
focus a little less on actual. Well, I would focus on diversity of those roots getting in there for pasture health.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would focus on making sure that we're at least exceeding or getting good at optimums on plant health, on photosynthesis. So making sure that what our levels look like in terms of some of magnesium specifically around here, iron and manganese,
Mm-hmm.
so that we get those plants to a higher fat content. There have been some very interesting studies in relationship to fat content in forage and what the effects of that are on cattle, and it's pretty profound. It's pretty interesting. So making sure that is being developed from a photosynthetic level, I think is important. Potassium can be important if we're thinking about making sure we're maintaining that stand of legumes in there.
Mm.
I think that's an important aspect of it. Some of these micros, you know, some of this is a little bit more dialed in for orchards or some things like that. That being said, cobalt and moly are incredibly important for a lot of nitrogen fixation and root growth in the soil. So I think that's an important move there, making sure it's there.
You would test
Let
that.
me-
You would test that
let
through
me
a
guess.
sap or just soil test?
We do. We'll do sap, or usually we'll choose like a grass. Let me give you an approach we would take that's pretty basic. So we have a blend that is essentially 40% phosphorus with calcium. It's basically a soluble rock soft
Mhm.
rock phosphate. So it's got calcium and phosphorus in it. And then we're gonna, along with that, we're gonna suggest a little bit of micros, so a micronutrient pack
Mm-hmm.
to make sure we're kind of covering a good array of things.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're going to have a little bit of a mix of some magnesium in there, a little bit of moly to make sure that's also there. So you can see what we'll just do a broad
Yeah.
spread of that
Yeah.
to make sure it's there and then move it forward.
micros on the pastures around here are very efficient.
Yeah.
And as far as like the calcium products, one I ordered from y'all that I like was the Holo-Cal. It has the boron in with it.
Yes.
And, cause there was one crop I was growing where I was pouring the calcium to it. It was a different product, but my problem is I had the pH problem. It was blocking the boron, which was not delivering any calcium to it. I didn't even see the calcium in the soil come up, so it was like, I was just throwing that out there for no reason. So, you need the boron in there as a carrier.
Yeah.
So I seen like in y'all's product, there was a lot of thought put into what we should mix together, I guess you would say.
We don't necessarily we give some recommendations for dry amendments based upon some soil test stuff parameters, and I can tell you a consistent recommendation is roughly around 2 pounds of boron, actual boron. Most soils we look at are gonna be low in that. It's gonna be harder for a co-op to spread because of its low amounts, but boron can be very effective. It will leach with low organic matter soils. It's gonna leach out of the soils, usually around, I believe it's a pound every 20 inches of precipitation. So you're gonna be losing boron over time if especially your organic matters are somewhat low. So, finding ways to make sure you got some boron in that soil, just beforehand can be a practical measure as well.
You can figure on a small plot, if you go get you some Mule-Team borax, it's 10% boron, so however many pounds of boron you need, you just multiply that by 10, use that much.
Yeah, borax is great.
And the way I apply it is just mix it in a tank of water and spray it.
Yeah.
It works pretty good.
Yep.
One thing I was thinking for the group, I don't think we hit on much, is like cultural practices, like how do you take care of this stuff? Your microbial populations.
That's a long conversation, and I think it's intimately matters to the crop when and how we can creatively start trying to make sure we've got roots in the ground year round.
Mainly making sure as soon as you till, you come in with a cover crop.
Yeah, around the issues of mechanical tillage, some are better than others. Doing it all the time is a negative. Doing it every now and then is a tool, right? We've seen no-till fields that do not breathe well. There's compaction. Sometimes that's because they are fundamentally depending on some pretty heavy burn downs. And so you end up getting a no-till system, but there's not good, it's anaerobic, it doesn't breathe well, and then you're also getting that pretty constant herbicide mix on it that is on some level disrupting a lot of microbial pathways. And specifically, there's a lot of good literature out there, and there's a lot of talk on it. John Kemp talks about it a lot, but like the pathways that glyphosate interrupts in the shikimate pathway along with bacteria, you are going to be hurting a lot of the microbial pathways with that. So finding ways to, if you need to apply it, move on, add something into it to re-inoculate that soil is one. Let's talk about water for a second. If you've got bicarbonate levels that are above 150 parts per million, you're losing a lot of your product in that water because it's getting tied up. And we've had examples where folks that were using certain kinds of herbicides drop their totals down, drop it down to 2% of what they were doing when they cleaned their water out. In this case, that was with a reverse osmosis system. So calculations economically on whether that makes sense based upon what those bicarbonate levels makes a difference. Or just capturing water for your foliars, rain.
I know on your products, is it, you want to get your tank mix pH down below 5.5?
Usually, and this is a little bit more like a plant thing instead of like a product thing, but a lot of foliars are going to have a little bit better of absorption if you're looking at between a 5.5 to 6.
5.5 to 6.
Keep that pH a little bit lower.
For some reason, that Titanium product, they're wanting it around 5. I guess it's more specific to that product, but.
Potentially. Yeah, so your foliars, and you know, foliars are a whole world in themselves. In fact, there's a great, I keep pushing it, but there's a great webinar on actually building foliars that John Kemp does. And he does a walkthrough on how he thinks about building really holistic foliar sprays. It's a fantastic piece of information, about 45 minutes long. Goes through everything from biological stimulants to humic substances to the mineral that you're trying to do. So that's definitely a helpful resource. But thinking about your water input, how clean that water is an important part of it. Looking at what the pH is can be another.
What are the concern areas for the water quality? What you said
Bicarbonates. Bicarbonates. Your bicarbonate, and you ask anybody to do a basic mineral test, not your E. coli test, but a mineral test on your water. And so there's a number of different categories, everything from hardness to alkalinity. I think the best number to look at is bicarbonate, and that usually comes standard. And what you want to find is that your water is at least below 150 parts per million. You're definitely good below around 70. And when I say good, all I mean is the following. You can potentially save a lot of money on what you're putting into that water as a foliar spray and reduce those amounts if you have a cleaner water. So over 150 parts per million, you know that stuff is potentially precipitating out, that it's getting tied up by those bicarbonates, and so it's not necessarily going to be in a plant available for it. Feels like a Friday afternoon. Anything else?
I don't think so.